Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is one of my first role-playing content videos, and the symbols for this are quite simple. Number one, I'm quite passionate about role-playing games, tabletop and video games. And two, I truly believe that role-playing is a great tool for budding writers to test out their ideas with a group of people who are actively engaging with their story. It's a practical tool to consistently improve your storytelling, your character dialogue, and more. In this video, we're going to look at my top 6 tips for beginner DMs. Before we start, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what your first role-playing game was, or your favourite moment in that role-playing game. Don't worry if you haven't played role-playing games before. I hope that this video will inspire you to, well, play them. So stick around if you want a little bit of inspiration on why you should. The first tip is try not to overplan as a new GM. It might make sense and make you feel more comfortable if you try to plot out every single dramatic moment in your story, every single plot, every single location, every single little bit of character dialogue, the clues and how they are laid out in the narrative. But it can actually make your job, especially as a beginner GM, actually more difficult. And here's why. Because your players, without a shadow of a single doubt, will 100% go off the beaten path. If you've planned everything down to those minute details, you'll kind of panic as a GM. You'll fall prey to your own planning and you won't know what to do or where to go. And ultimately that might affect the overall flow and the fun of the session. So my best advice would be to just try and plot out the key moments that you want to explore in the session or in this part of the story. It will help you kind of improvise on the spot, and also some basic descriptions of the locations that your players might visit. And don't be afraid to twist these or change them on the fly. You'll find that the overall role-playing session will be a lot more flexible and will be a lot more engaging for your players if you do this. You won't feel like you have to stick to exactly what you've written. You know, if the players were meant to go and speak to this woodsman specifically at his hut because he has been acting unusual as of late, which might be connected to the town's problems, but the players instead choose to just go out into the woods and hunt down the goblins because they think they are the source of the problem, have them meet your huntsman in the woods. He's chopping wood in the middle of the night, which is totally fine. For example, if you've got a goblin's hideout in the mountains that's on the outskirts of the village, but the players choose to basically stay inside of the town all session, then just change the location of that goblin's hideout, you know? Make it part of the sewers underneath the town. Make it part of the crypt. The overall location will kind of change, but the general details, what's inside, the traps that you've kind of had an idea for, or the enemies, the specific NPCs, they won't, because they're part of the narrative. Right. Next tip, let your players try anything. You know, embrace their imagination and their creativity. You know, does the weak wizard want to try an act of strength? Let them. Does your party want to confront the leader of a gang without any investigation? To borrow a phrase, they can certainly try. #critical role. Your players will create the world around them with their actions and as they converse with the NPC. This is part of the role-playing process. It's a collaborative process of world building and storytelling. Even if it's ridiculous, let the players do whatever it is that they want to try. You know, even if they fail, make that an important moment in the story that your players will remember. If they roll well, it'll tell for an amazing story. If they don't roll well, it'll also tell for an amazing story. This leads me to my next tip. Keep the rules handy, but always follow the golden rule of having fun. Fun is first and foremost. Make sure that the game is fun. You just want a level of engagement from your players. You know, if they're asking questions about the world, they're really involved in saving a certain NPC, you're getting emotional reactions, they are building their own backstories with each other and learning about each other's backstories and engaging with those backstories, then as a GM, that's a success. You know, if that ends up being the primary focus of a role-playing session, that's a success, not just following your story that you have in your head as a GM. You know, the rules are there to make the spells, the attacks, the ability checks, the law checks, the saving throws, whatever it is that they're trying to check or test against, just to make the game run smoothly. But mechanics aside, they just allow you to run the game so you can focus on having fun. Also, kind of my next tip, is to add flavor where there isn't any, or to add extra flavor to make the game more interesting. For example, you could easily change the cantrip spell of a wizard to be a frost shard instead of a fire bolt. Mechanically, all that you're changing here is the damage type from fire to ice, but you're giving that extra flavor that your player can connect with. It might be related to their backstory, why they want to do ice magic and not fire. Really, it's not really a meaningful choice or change, but to the player it will be. And you can kind of use that change in interesting ways in the narrative as well. Again, it'll help them immerse in the story. Or, and kind of what I said earlier, make the failures just as fun as the successes. Actually, this is, yeah, pretty much is my next tip. Failures can just be as interesting and as narratively significant as the successes. Critical failures even more so. They show you the true limits that your character is capable of, and it can often increase tension in a scene where there shouldn't be any, which can create really interesting outcomes. It might even cause conflict where conflict was not foreseen, and create hilarious situations where players want to have a bit of fun, and players will certainly remember for a long time. Actually, I should just probably make all 6 of these tips just to make sure that your players have fun no matter what. Just 6 times across the screen here. That'd probably be a lot of an easier video. To edit, I mean, obviously. Let your players fail, let your NPCs fail, make sure they have fun, make sure that your villains and your antagonistic forces can fail too. It will create a much more plausible and interesting moment. Next up, when it comes to describing your locations, try to include olfactory details. Details that kind of cover all 5 of the senses if you can and when appropriate. For sight, what do the players see? What do they smell? What do they feel? Is there a taste in the air? How does the ground underfoot feel as they walk? Is it significant? If you describe the settings or the locations that they visit with these kind of details, it can more easily trigger an emotional response from your players, because those kind of details we experience on a daily basis. And that's actually a very important part of narrative design, is getting that emotional response. An example, you walk out of the tavern into the hustle and bustle of mid-morning streets. Children are standing on the flat rooftops playing their favorite dice games. Hawkers are shouting, trying to get the attention of travelers to purchase their local cuisines and delicacies. The fresh smell of rain still hangs in the air from the previous evening's storm, mixed with the metallic tang of the blacksmith's workshop next door. You walk out onto the rough, uneven cobblestones, feeling recharged from your night's sleep. What do you all plan to do next? Lastly, make sure that you flesh out your NPCs and you make them interesting. However, don't fall into the trap that every single character that you play as a GM is significant or is indeed an NPC. For me, I consider NPCs the important characters that have a significant connection to the narrative or the backstory of a character. Other characters are simply part of the crowd. They're there for a player to interact with, to ask a question. NPCs, in my opinion, I could be wrong on this, but I think that they need to have a narrative reason for being there, and they need to have standout features that make them memorable in your player's eyes. These details can include the way the NPC speaks, the way they look, their mannerisms, how they rub people up the wrong way. A whole combination of these or more. Jarvan, a mentor and a guide wizard, is obsessed with cleanliness, and he tends to speak incredibly directly and without any thought at all, which can rub people up the wrong way. This was one of the characters in a recent mage campaign that I was running with a group of friends, and he got interesting reactions from different NPCs and the players themselves. Some of them liked him, some of them kind of were a bit standoffish with him because of the way that he acted. Some just thought him hilarious. The important thing is they remembered the NPC and they knew what to expect, or not expect should I say, in certain situations with that NPC. I hope that these 6 tips have kind of helped, but to summarize, don't overplan, instead improvise. Let the players try anything. Keep the rules handy, but follow the golden rule of fun. Make failures just as fun as the successes. Describe using all 5 of the senses when you can, and when you should. Flesh out your NPCs and give them standout features. If you follow these simple tips, you'll become a better GM, you'll have smoother games, and you'll have more fun with your players. You'll also have a huge benefit over other writers that aren't doing any sort of role-playing or engaging with role-playing games, even the video games, because you'll get to develop your ideas, or at least generate ideas that other writers wouldn't. And you get to test these ideas out with real people who actively want to engage with your story, which is literally the perfect audience. If you're interested in learning more about role-playing, the lore behind these games, Dungeons & Dragons history, concepts related to role-playing fiction and more, subscribe and share this video with others too. Also, I've just started a Patreon account because I had a few requests on Twitter. This is basically, it's totally optional, you don't need to do it, but it's basically a way for some people to show support to the channel so I can focus more time and energy making these videos, putting them together and editing. The editing takes so long. And also please hit that like button if you've really enjoyed the video or you've learned something from this video. Please share it if you've got any writer friends or people who've been thinking about being a GM in role-playing, or who just like playing role-playing games but then maybe want to do a bit of writing or a bit of narrative design or a bit of game development. Basically anyone who you think will get a benefit of some kind. Finally, if you're itching for content, please click on one of the videos out on screen. You might find something interesting to learn, it might be a bit informative of a different fiction concept that you haven't tried out before, or it might just help you generate a new idea to try. So I'll see you in the next video.